One.
Okay, welcome everybody to the Coaches Catch-Up in almost July or end of June. And today we have Ron George from Dubai, who's going to talk to us about training in the heat. Thank you, Ron. I'm sure you have a lot of experience with that, and you manage successfully a group of athletes who have to figure this one out. So all of us, I think, we get confronted with it at least sometime in the summer. But I know specifically for me that heat training for the Olympics, which is always held in a very hot city in the middle of summer, usually for good TV time. So it is a real art, and so looking forward to this presentation. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for introducing me, Lorraine and Colin. As Lorraine said, I live in the UAE, but I'm not a native of the UAE. I'm an expat, like many people who live here for work. I am an engineer by background, but I run. I've been running since the age of 17, and maybe more competitively since the age of about 24, 25. So yeah, still an also ran. I've been I'm trying to get a marathon timing, a potential marathon timing of a sub 3, which is what every calculator tells that I'm capable of doing, but it's still a work in progress. So without further ado, I've got a presentation. So how do I let me see
If
here.
you if
Can
you
I
if you go to
present?
the gut if you go to the gutter, press share screen.
Right, share screen. There you go. All right, perfect. Share.
There we go.
Yeah. Does everyone see that?
Yeah. And then you need, perfect. You got it, Ron.
Very good. Okay, I've titled this "Beating the Heat While Training and Racing in the UAE." My hope is that this presentation, while it talks about what I do as a coach and what my runners do as while training here in the UAE, I hope it is relevant for all of us in the room here. I think that all of you are here in this evening to gain something out of this, because this heat problem affects everyone around the world. And we'll talk about why it's a hot topic right now. No pun intended. So let's get on with it. The agenda for today, I just want to, like I said before, just want to talk a little about myself before I get into the nitty gritty, the background into hot weather, and then we'll talk about training interventions, um, health testing, and what I found about the effect of gender on training in the heat. So about me, as I said, I'm about 20 years I've spent as a runner. Some of it has been competitive. It's mainly a side passion, but it can be an all-consuming hobby at times, especially after I turned to coach, because I've got so many athletes and they keep me very, very busy. I'm more of a short distance athlete, to be honest. I've realized my 5 minute mile time, but I want to go sub 5 sometime soon. I still got a bit of speed, 18 minutes in the 5K, but I've really got my eyes on that marathon, and it's really a work in progress because of so many factors that, as you know, the marathon is you never get a perfect day of the marathon. So that's so in short, I'm an also ran. Okay, and I'm not ashamed to say that. Um, Lydiard, I was Lydiard two certified, level 2 certified in 2020 when all of us were glued to our indoors and in front of our screens, and we were bored to death, wondering what to do. And I found out about the Lydiard Foundation, and And I had read a little about Lydiard back then, and I thought, wow, okay, let's learn more about this and see how we can get certified. So that was in 2020, and more recently, I got certified as a U.E.E running coach. That's an outfit in the United States, but that's a for-profit, and it's an up and coming, I guess, branch of coaching education. Um, but really, I've been training runners in Dubai and some parts of the world. Uh, I started in about 2013, 2014 timeframe. And I found I really enjoyed it. And that was before I got my coaching certification. I just really enjoyed, um, using people as the proverbial lab rats, and giving them a program and seeing improvements, because ultimately it is about improving someone's life, right? For me, it's like it's a community service. A coach as a community builder, as a person, really. I mean, I my mom wanted me to be a doctor, but I never made her happy. I turned out to be an engineer instead. But this is in some ways fulfilling that unmet hope, the dream, because when you are coaching somebody or a group of people and improving their life, you are in some respects a doctor, a village doctor, and you're really giving um, training interventions and advice that works. But so many times medications don't. And running to me is a medication, a drug of sorts. It's a multi-pill. It improves so many aspects of your life. So that's what really kept me glued to this passion. And I continued on and formed a club. And we're called House of Runners. We're on Instagram. If anyone wants to check us out, you'll see photos and videos of what we do. We have a website as well. I started this in Abu Dhabi in 2017, along with a British friend of mine who used to work for the British Embassy. Now she's transferred out and gone back to the UK. But we put together a little club to meet once or twice a week. It grew as a meetup, and then we moved away from the meetup website, and we actually made it more of a non-profit thing. And now, when I moved from Abu Dhabi to Dubai, I took the club with me, and I found a new community of runners, and now it's just growing. And so we're not only based in Dubai, but then I've got some runners in other parts of the world, UK, Ireland, South Korea. So I'm I'm kind of supervising runners in different parts of the world, and it's always interesting to see um, how different geographical conditions affecting the training. So that's something that's very interesting to me. So I've got some scholarly tastes in endurance sports. Mainly, I like to read about training interventions and the history of distance training. So behind me, I've got a big bookshelf, a lot of books, all the way from the 1960s, 1950s, and I still like to continue to read, because I mean, I really believe we stand on the shoulders of giants. There's nothing new in running that hasn't been tried, and Lydiard is a godfather in this area. He's A lot of the modern training practices came from Lydiard, and so that really interests me. I don't know about you, but it's certainly something that draws me to the sport. So a bit about the U.A.E. for those of you who bit shallow on their geography. Latitude 23.4, longitude 53.84. It's nestled between Saudi Arabia on the west and Oman on the east, and you've got Iran on the north. We've got this Gulf between these countries. So it's an oil-rich nation, and it's no surprise that the wealth comes from oil. And a lot of companies came here in the early 50s and helped the Arabs get the oil out of the ground, and that's how the riches have grown. Abu Dhabi is where it's all centered, the wealth, and it is the capital. Dubai, on the other hand, is more like a Los Angeles. They they grew up from a very humble trade of pearl diving right around independence, and now it's grown to, the economy is very diverse. It's not just oil, but it's trade, it's services, it's many things. So Dubai is a more diversified economy. Having said that, can anyone guess the weather in this region? Yes, you guessed it. It's very arid, right? It's not something that the Arabs can engineer out of. It's very natural to the area. It's dry. Out of 12 months in a year, very, very hot during May to about October. So the real cool months are November, December, and January, February tends to be the coolest months. But it just gets warmer and warmer from March onwards. And then we are now in June, and I can't say that we're at the peak of summer yet. July and August are going to be really, really warm. Just to give you an idea, today we did our Sunday long run, and we ran about 22, 23 kilometers. But it was about 33 degrees when we started, 67% humidity. So if you can calculate that in your head, that's like a feels like of 35, 36. And I'll come to why maybe feels like temperature is not the end all. You know, when you consider wind speed, humidity, there's different stressors that affects that index. So why are we talking about training in the heat? It's no surprise. World is getting warmer, right? Extremes are becoming more frequent. Colin mentioned about heat waves in the UK. Same thing all over the world. You got heat waves in India. You got heat waves in the US. One thing about the heat waves, it's getting more extreme, but lasting longer. So the effects of the heat wave on people are lasting longer. The prime root cause is the record levels of atmospheric CO2. Now, CO2 is the global warming agent. Now, you talk about global warming potential of some of these gases, and methane is right at the top, but just below that is CO2, and there's record levels of CO2 in the atmosphere. Something like, the last time I checked, it was about 420 parts per million. So this is what scientists tell us is causing the warming. And then there's all these other effects like El Nino, which is associated with the ocean, and whether the severity of the El Nino is driven by the warm weather and the warmer oceans, that's a whole other topic. So I'm not a geography or a weather expert, but it's a no-brainer that the world is getting warmer, and we are breaking records in temperature every month, every year. Now, athletes, and more specifically runners, will be increasingly training in a warmer world. But feel free to challenge me. There are people who still don't believe in global warming. They think it's all due to volcanoes and this and that, and there's a volcano, burst somewhere tomorrow, maybe we'll have global cooling. I don't know. People say that. So it's a debate. It's a debate. But when I go out to run, I feel the effect of temperature. I don't know about you guys, but it's something really big to contend with. All right. So we talk about heat stress. The business of measuring heat stress. So historically, there's been two lines of thought. One is heat index, and the other is wet bulb globe temperature. Now, both of these came from the US military and kind of became accepted practice. There is a difference between heat index and wet bulb globe temperature. So heat index is measured in the shade, okay, and it uses the ambient temperature. So when normally someone talks about what's the temperature today, they're talking about the ambient temperature as measured with a thermometer. But as runners, I would suggest we all think in terms of wet bulb globe temperature, which takes into account not only the temperature, the the ambient temperature, but also the relative humidity, the wind, the cloud cover, and the sun angle. And those kind of things are very relevant here, because the sun angle at 5:30 or 5:45 a.m., just at sunrise, is not the same sun angle at 7 a.m. when we are about 1.5 hours into the run. And things can dramatically change in terms of the heat stress. So normally we start our run 5 a.m. and we try to get done by 7:15. Because that sun is just going up and up and up, and the severity of the stress is getting higher and higher. So humidity, again, not something I need to explain. We all know, we feel it when our sweat isn't evaporating and there's a lot of moisture in the air. The humidity makes it difficult for the sweat to evaporate, which is the main way our skin cools, and our core body temperature can decrease through evaporation. So when the air is saturated with water vapor, we're not able to get that sweat to evaporate. And so what I'm trying to say is, you can have 90 degrees temperature and a relatively low humidity, but that same 90-degree temperature and a high relative humidity can dramatically shift the stress. And this is what this table shows here. So just if you look at the first two lines, you got or let's look at the 4 lines down, the fourth and the fifth line. So you got 90-degree temperature, all right? You got a dew point of the same dew point, 70 degrees. Got sky. So the sky percentage is the cloud cover. So the cloud cover is 10 in one and 60 in the other. You can see that how the wet bulb globe temperature is affected. So in one, when the cloud cover is lower, it's 88. When the cloud cover is higher, 60%. It's lower. So, but on the other hand, the heat index is the same. So it depends. This is it. So it's better to take into account all of these factors and think about the wet bulb globe temperature. So let's take an example. Now it's 4 a.m. It's partly cloudy, temperature of 33 degrees, humidity of 67%. And this is a real world data I'm giving you. The wind is blowing at 2 meters a second. So there's a fancy calculator here. It's really, it's a good one. If you want to play around with it, you can just set these dials to the specific numbers in your area, and you can see the difference between wet bulb globe temperature and the heat index. Okay, so for this particular example, I get a wet bulb globe temperature of 90. On the other hand, the dry bulb temperature, which is 33 degrees, that comes to about 91.4 degree F. So anytime the wet bulb globe temperature and the dry bulb temperature comes together, like matches, that just means that the potential for a heat stress is more. All right. If the wet bulb globe temperature falls due to, let's say, there's more cloud cover, or the sun angle is low, or there's a nice wind blowing despite the ambient temperature being high, that wet bulb globe temperature is going to fall, and you're going to feel perhaps a little better in terms of perceived effort. Yeah. So that's again something you can play around with, but rarely do we look at all these things. We just go out and feel how it is, right? It's perceived effort for most of us. We don't sit and crunch all these numbers together, but this is again a nice way to think about it, that all of these factors affect how we feel. This is a risk matrix for wet bulb globe temperature. So right at the top is a green area where the risk is low. Now this instruction is mainly for people who are sort of working outdoors, but not necessarily athletes. Maybe not too acclimatized. So with the low risk, it says body is stressed after 45 minutes. So what's an action? at least 15 minutes of break for each hour of work in direct sun. Okay. On the other hand, you look at the high stress matrix. So a high stress is 88 to 90 wet bulb globe temperature. The body is stressed after 20 minutes, heat exhaustion possible. And so for that, you follow like at least 40 minutes of breaks for each hour of work in the direct sun. Now, let's go back to the previous slide. This is a real world example. You can see that for those variables, the wet bulb globe temperature calculated is 90. And this instruction says, body is stressed after 90 minutes, heat exhaustion possible. Yes, that's true, but the human body is remarkable. When we train as runners for weeks on weeks, the body adapts and acclimatizes to the heat. And so this particular instruction, at least 40 minutes of break for each hour of work in direct sun, doesn't really apply to running. I mean, good, well-trained runners can go up to 2 hours in this heat with short breaks, of course, So the instruction that applies to people who are working in the sun for a profession doesn't really apply to runners who are most of the time out and whose bodies adapt. So that's the real kicker of this, is our bodies are amazing in terms of the ability to adapt and get better at surviving in the heat. And here's a little effect of marathon performance and temperature. But the bottom line I want you to pay attention to is the last two statements. Okay, the wet bulb globe temperature affects performance, and it's not pretty. Here's two takeaways. The higher the wet bulb globe temperature, the more effect it has on performance. No surprise. We've seen some of the hot weather marathons in, for example, the Olympics, Tokyo Olympics, for example, the Tokyo Marathon, or the ones in Doha. I can remember the Doha Marathon. They were all, I mean, they broke records in terms of the heat that that the runners were made to run in. And in Doha, I believe they started the race at 10 p.m. or something. It was ridiculous. But anything, when it comes to anything beyond the 800-meter mile, etc., any long duration running is affected by the heat, and that's what you got to take away from this. But for a 400-meter runner, is his performance really affected by the heat? Not so much. But for endurance running, it is a big factor. Okay. Now, the second point here is also interesting. The slower the runner, the bigger the impact that wet bulb globe temperature has on performance. So this is something you need to take into account among your runners. Certainly it is the case in mine. The slower runners who maybe in a cool weather situation run at 7 minutes a kilometer for their endurance pace, when the weather heats up, they are running even slower. And because they are, for a given amount, for a given distance, they are spending more time on their feet outdoors, and hence the stress on them is much more than the runners who can get across a line quicker, if you understand what I mean. I also seen that slower runners in general have a little bit more adiposity in terms of body weight, fat content, and these things act as a blanket. I mean, the number one enemy of of running in the heat is excess body fat, and I can't emphasize that enough. But the fortunate thing is that as we give training to runners, and as they keep training, their body weight, if they're doing everything right with their training and with their diet, their body weight will decrease. So that's a good thing about running. But when they start out, the stress that they have is much higher because of they're just getting off the couch, and their body weight isn't optimized. So you see a greater stress in these runners. But as time progresses, they get strong, and that's the thing about the adaptation aspect. There's a nice running book. If anyone, I highly recommend this book. It's by Pete McGill, and he breaks down so many things of running into very nice charts and diagrams, and very simple facts. So it's called Build Your Running Body. But in that book, in one of the chapters, he's got pace adjustments according to temperature. Okay, so just let's take an example. Let's say that, and this is, by the way, in minutes per mile. Okay, so if you're an 8-minute miler, normal, let's say at 15 degrees C, you're normally running at 8-minute mile. Or sorry, 53 Fahrenheit, you're an 8-minute miler at 53 Fahrenheit. If the temperature were to increase to, let's say, 80 Fahrenheit, the instruction is to slow down by 15 seconds a mile. Okay, and the higher that temperature goes, which is on your left, the slower you need to get. Now, what's the idea behind this? I mean, it's not, I mean, why do you think this is the case? Why do you have to slow down? It's to decrease the rate of work, right? The higher the rate of work, the more muscular contraction and more heat, the more internal heat you generate. So as this temperature grows up, it is very important for you to slow down in order to maintain a similar level of heat production in the body. Because if the temperature is 100 degrees Fahrenheit and you're going to continue running at 8 minutes a mile, you might fall into trouble. Your endurance time might decrease, sometimes dramatically. You might need maybe more external carbohydrate intervention, because when you run in the heat, one of the things we understand from the science is the substrate utilization is affected. More carbohydrates are required to run quickly in the heat. So if you plan to run at pace, especially at higher temperatures, you better pack some extra gels with you. So that's something else to think of. But again, the main idea here is to limit the amount of, to draw a line at how much internal heat production it happens in the body, because that heat has got to go somewhere. And if it's not going to move out of the body into the atmosphere, maybe due to the high relative humidity, you're in trouble, because that heat is simply going to be stored in the body. This is a nice to have device, it's very expensive. It's a wet bulb globe temperature meter. I've seen some videos where people use this in professional sports like American football and so on, but it kind of reads out in digital format, the stress. So here it says 70.8 degree Fahrenheit. But this takes into account all of these things, factors we just talked about, the humidity, the sun angle, and so on. But it costs $500. So my question to you all is, what's a cheaper real-time tool we can use? Maybe a talk test? It doesn't cost anything, right? And I'll come to how we can use the talk test and how I use it among my runners. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but again, a nice stick figure here, stick figure explanation of what's going on. So you're running at, let's say, the same runner at 8-minute mile pace, and inside his body, he's using the meals he's had to convert chemical energy into mechanical energy, right? But that takes heat. And the human body is an engine like any other, like your internal combustion engine in your car. But unfortunately, it's only 22 to 25% efficient, depending on whom you talk to. Almost 70% is lost as heat, and that heat has got to go somewhere out into the atmosphere, right? So the sun is shining brightly and it's hitting the asphalt and throwing it back at you, and you're heating up. Your core body temperature is heating up, and that heat and your heart rate is going up. It's shooting through the roof to get the blood to the skin so that you can start sweating, and through the process of convection and evaporation to cool off, because evaporation takes heat out, right? So sweat has got a latent heat of vaporization. So So all this has got to happen like clockwork for you to be able to maintain core body temperature. The moment something doesn't work right here, like for example, if the relative humidity is high and you're not sweating, if the temperature is higher, and often that's the case where we run here in Dubai, the ambient temperature outside, which I just told you, is like 35, 36 sometimes with the humidity and everything. And our body temperature is 37. You see how close those two things are? So if the closer those two temperatures are, there's no temperature gradient for that heat to escape, because heat goes from, it's a cooler to a hotter environment, right? Sorry, a hotter environment to a cooler environment. So if the atmosphere is is just as hot as your body, that heat is not going to escape. So that's the idea over here. Now, another thing to take into account, especially when we run here in the asphalt, the blacktop, when that sun is hitting the blacktop and that blacktop has gotten 2-3 hours to heat up, this is the reason we don't run beyond 7:30, because that blacktop has got 2.5 hours to heat up. And the more later you make your run, you're going to be running in like a cloud of heat, because the heat is also being thrown out by this blacktop. So it creates a heat island right there. So these are some of the factors we got to take into account when we run. The heat balance equation. So this is the energy we burn when we burn oxygen, and this is the W is the work rate. So the subtract when you subtract, you get what you lose as heat. Yeah, what is produced as heat, the heat production, and that if you are in equilibrium, that heat production will equate to how much is lost through radiation, conduction, evaporation. So that I don't want to get too deep into this, but this is an equation to show the heat balance. And most of the time, you don't get heat balance, especially in the area I train in. You don't get heat balance because of the things I told you about. The humidity is high. So sometimes, there's this term S, which is how much is stored in the body. People with adipose tissue and high fat content, they tend to store heat inside, especially when running in the heat. They tend to store, and that's why the core body temperature rises. And that's why these people should not be allowed to run too much, or you should figure out a training intervention for them to limit the amount of stress they put on their bodies in the heat. But I also talked about heat acclimatization. So that's an adaptation of the body. So as you continue training, your core body temperature tends to stabilize, your pulse rate decreases, and you tend to sweat more. You tend to make use more of your sweat glands. And normally it's considered like 14 days of heat exposure can dramatically improve your chances of being in the heat more. Like, so it takes about roughly 2 weeks of training, and I would say every day about 40 to 45 minutes of exposure to the heat, whether that's actually going out or maybe using a sauna to just expose yourself, because you then activate your sweat glands and you teach your body how to deal with this heat. So someone who has not had this is going to have much more stress than someone who's had the training. So that's the whole aspect of heat acclimatization. Some other aspects of heat acclimatization: water intake. So here, so sweating increases, just as I talked about. This is you can read more about this on this link. Your blood volume increases. Sweating increases. Behavioral changes occur. So you realize, okay, you're not wearing the right things, and as you continue to experiment, you wear less clothing. You try to optimize for these kind of things. So they found out from very early studies that if you subject people to an intervention of heat exposure, and in this study, for example, men worked each for 9 days for 100 minutes at a time. And when they looked at core body temperature and pulse rate, they all decreased, and sweat rate increased. And so a lot of our thinking behind heat acclimatization comes from these studies where they prove that people get better with more exposure to the heat and more experience. I'll come to this fact, but it's very important to understand that a lot of the thermal mechanisms, the thermostat in the body, that's affected by the hormones as well as the brain, right? And it could be that you never know, actually, unless you get a health test done, that you have a stable thyroid hormone. Because if you have an overactive thyroid or an underactive thyroid, the thyroid is very, very important when it comes to um, temperature regulation. So let's look at this image on the right. What happens when the body temperature is high? So the temperature receptors initiate a heat releasing mechanism, okay? And then superficial arteries are dilated, causing flushing and increasing heat loss to the air. But you see this stuff here, the thyroid stimulates cells to decrease metabolic heat production. So that happens in the warmer, when the body temperature is high. And the opposite occurs when the body temperature is low, where here the thyroid stimulates your cells to do the exact opposite. So if your thyroid is not stable, and I encourage everyone to get a health test at least once a year and get a thyroid test done. If you didn't have a stable thyroid, one of the key mechanisms of this temperature regulation is not working correctly. And it could be that your ability to withstand the heat might be somewhat connected to your hormones. Okay. Until now, I hope that I gave a good background into why we are interested in this aspect. Now I want to talk about very quickly about training interventions. And I want to breeze through this, but this I think will interest a lot of you, because this talks about how I use coaching methods to like really survive in this heat. So let's talk about the talk test. I talked about how the talk test can be a real-time tool to measure comfort while running and also measure the intensity. So let's say that you're running an 8-minute mile pace. At the start of a run in 33 degrees C temperature, you might feel great and you might be able to repeat something like 101, 102, 103, which is what I do. I count. You might be able to go up to 110 with no problems when you start the run. 90 minutes into the run, it's going to be a different story. You might say 101, 102, 103, 104, 105. Your pace didn't change, but your heart rate is increased. You're sweating more. Your core body temperature is going up. And the talk test really reveals something that, okay, maybe it's time to slow down, take a break. So we do this often with my club here, House of Runners. In fact, we test runners both in the summertime and the wintertime. So in the wintertime, we tabulate the results, and in the summer we do the same and we compare. And oftentimes we see that the heart rates are higher in the summer, and the talk test failure point, that is at the pace and the heart rate where the talk test fails, it happens at a higher heart rate. And so it's important to, especially where I am, it's important to have a talk test for these two different climates, because sometimes you can only compare, I feel, you can compare winter numbers with winter numbers and summer numbers in summer, because summer phase is a different phase and winter training phase is a different phase. So another thing we use is a heart rate monitor. It's like you all, I'm sure it's very popular across the world. Runners just love to see their heart rate when they're training in the heat. And they always like to control that heart rate. In fact, the thinking is, oh, my heart rate is rising. How can I just stabilize it, Well, it will rise, but hopefully it will stabilize at some point. But why the heart rate is rising is due to the reasons I just told you. The heart is working overtime to get the blood, the air condition in your body moving, to get that blood to the skin so it can start the evaporation process. So it's got to rise. And if it doesn't rise, you're gonna be in trouble. But oftentimes we see a disconnect between pace and heart rate. So in winter time, you have a certain pace and you have a certain heart rate associated with it. When it comes to the summer, that whole thing just blows up. It decouples, so to speak. For some runners, you see a heart rate that just keeps rising and rising and rising without any stability. One other really good thing with the heart rate, especially when I implement things like the walk-run method. So you run a little bit and walk a little bit. When you take those walk recoveries, I ask runners to just monitor how quickly their heart rate falls during that maybe 1 minute of walking time. Normally, I see that the fitter runners, the heart rate falls quicker than the runners who are not as fit. So this is one way to use a heart rate nicely, especially in the heat. A good starting point for a target heart rate, I take 2/3 of my working heart rate range. That is my maximum heart rate minus my resting heart rate. And then I add my resting heart rate to that, plus a couple of beats. That's a good starting point for an endurance run. But as I said, in the heat, the heart rate just sometimes grows. It just keeps increasing and stabilizes at some value. So you got to figure out what is your heart rate that is normal for you. You can't compare yourself with another person. So this is, we use it in practice, but I tell my runners not to get too lost with the heart rate, because heart rate rises with the heat. You would instead try and rely more on the talk test to measure your comfort and to cut back on the intensity when it's required. The next intervention is timing the run. So I told you how the sun rises here at about 5:15, 5:30. So it's a no-brainer that the earlier you can make your run, the better, right? So here's a photo of a runner who we started our long run today at exactly 4 a.m. Now, these kind of practices are probably very strange in the UK. And I know you guys like to run at 8 a.m., 9 a.m. But here that's too late, unfortunately. Here's a little photo of a little table of today's weather for the 30th of June. So you can see that at 4 a.m. it was 33 degrees C, right? About when we ended our run, it rose up 1 degree centigrade, right? And the humidity also changes. So it's more humid in the morning. That somewhat changes a little towards the later part. But what happens towards 8 a.m., 9 a.m., these are the danger parts of the day. You don't want to be out. You don't want to be out during, doing a run when it's 35, 36, because the sun angle is up. It's sometimes right overhead. The blacktop has gotten time to heat up and everything is hot around you. So we try to go early and we shut down the run at 7:15. So this is a very, very normal, common practice when training in Dubai. Another training intervention is using microclimates. I don't know if this is something that you've seen, but I've got a satellite photo of my community, and I've got these blue X's on a residential community. This is where a heat island is. It's the heat is trapped here because there's lots of apartments and lots of cars and traffic. On the other hand, there's this vacant spot full of sand, and it's got nice sand trail. It's actually a jeep track as a service road for electric lines and laying pipelines, but it's most of the time it's deserted. Sometimes in the winter, I really feel at least a half a degree difference. So, for example, if I'm training, if I sometimes run along this loop of road here, if you can see my cursor. When I'm running on this side of the map, I feel that heat coming at me. On the other hand, when I get to about this point here, suddenly it's changed. It's dropped by about half a degree, and I can really feel it. And that's why we use sand a lot. Here in the arid climates, I think this is it's not a secret. The sand takes time to heat up, and it takes time to also lose its heat. So that sand remains cool for a longer period of time. So we tend to mix up our runs on different terrain, and we prefer to run on the sand as well. Just like the Kenyans, you see in the Kenyans training, they train a lot on the soft track. It's a bit like that here. In my training, we at least once every 2 weeks we're training in the sand. So here's an example of today's run. So here's one of my runners. She's traversing this sand track. It's about the sun hasn't risen, but it's about 5:15 a.m. there. Okay. And one of the things we see so this sand track has got these ups and downs, right? We see that sometimes when it's in these depressions that the cold, denser air accumulates. So when we go up the hill and then we go down, we actually go into a blanket of cool air. That's an interesting thing. Here's I myself with some of my Kenyan running mates, and we are doing this sand loop for the second time of the day. It's about 6:15, yeah, and it's getting warm, but not as warm as what it would be, what the blacktop would be at the same point in time. Another training method is the run-walk intervention. So here's one of my runners in a place called Fujairah, which is on the eastern coast of U.A.E. And you can see that if it were cooler, he would have no problems running 22 kilometers at a constant pace. But because his heart rate was rising, which is this red trace, he had to do some kind of an intervention. And I advised him to try and follow maybe a 5-minute run, 1-minute walk. And he followed something similar to that, and he survived. However, if he just kept running, that heart rate would just keep increasing, and it would really put a lot of stress on him. So you can see how the paces just get slower and slower. This is from Strava. The heat really kills you. And this is a runner who didn't have much practice training in the heat. So this is one of his first long runs he subjected himself to. But my belief is, as he keeps doing stuff like this, these paces and his ability to endure the heat will get better. Now this is a runner the same runner, on the left, he trained in Dubai. And on the right, within a week's time, he went for a holiday in Italy, where he is from originally. So on the left, he did his first hot run. He was barely able to get 8 kilometers, and he ran for about an hour. But you can see how his heart rate was like 169 beats a minute. And at this point, he had to simply just take a walk, take a little bit of recovery, and turn it into a block training method where he would run for maybe 10 minutes and then take a little break and keep running. The same runner goes to Italy. So here it was in Dubai, it was maybe 32 degrees. In Sardinia, in Italy, where he was this past week, it was 20, 22, 23, something like that. He was able to run with undisturbed. He didn't need any kind of run walk method here. And his pace, you can see his average pace was 6:06. And here it was 7:12 minutes a kilometer. So you can see, if you remember the table I showed you, this kind of correlates, right? If you want to survive in the heat, you got to bring that, and your body tells you that you got to run slow. But that same runner goes to Italy and he's able to crunch out this long run, no problems, and he was able to keep his heart rate somewhat under control as well. Whereas here it was just rising and rising, where he got up to 180 beats a minute and he said, "Oh my God, I got to stop and walk a little bit before I do this again." And here he had no problems. Now, I instead of always doing a long continuous run, every alternate week we do mile repeats. And this is nice and helpful because I find that it helps us run at pace for a long time, for about 8 to 10 minutes, but then we can take a break of 2 to 3 minutes and then repeat it again, rather than the the thing which I showed you here, was just run continuously like a frog in boiling water. You don't realize you're dying until it's really gets warm. So with my runners like mile repeats a lot because they're able to run at pace and they're able to run in pace groups. So here's a photo of runners preparing for the mile repeat, and they're just looking at their watches, setting it, and ready to go. So that's me on the right, blowing the whistle. So what I'm trying to tell you is we don't do long runs every Sunday. We do long runs once every 14 days, but we alternate it with mile repeats, okay, block type training. And mile repeats is something I love because you just I think it's widely used across the world, and it's just uh, it we're able to compare our times from week to week. The mile is a mile, and so how quickly we do it and how better we do a given distance, and how it improves over time is a real it showcases improvement. Again, this text is just what I just talked about, so I don't want to go deep into that. Curating the distance run. So as a coach, you have to curate the distance run in terms of location. Where is it at? Do you have tree-lined streets? Do you have shade? Do you have a shopping mall nearby with maybe a washroom, or because oftentimes running in the heat will induce gastrointestinal symptoms in some runners. So you got to figure out if there's toilets nearby, and should the run be a block type training or should it be a long continuous run? These are some of the things we have to think about. Sometimes we do run challenges, and it's like today's run challenge was 30 kilometers, although very few runners got to 30. A lot of runners made it to 21, but we made it like an ultra running style event where we had a checkpoint and runners would run loops and get back to the checkpoint and take drinks and then take a couple of minutes to get their heart rates down and then go again. So we do this checkpoint style business. I really like it because it really works well in the heat. So yeah, this is again some of the summaries of curating the long run. The timing is everything. And the long run duration, we don't start out with 2.5 hour runs. We start out with more like 70, 80 minutes on the feet. And as I see these runners and their data and see them improving over time, that long run goes from 90 minutes and then goes up to 2 hours. So it is a very organic progression. And then location is everything. You're going to think about the streets, tree-lined streets, whether it's sand terrain or road. We think about microclimates, all of this. Sometimes we go to the beach. The beach can be humid because that water body right on the side is huge water body that again brings its own, it induces its own microclimate on a beach, and it could be very, very humid. So I rarely go to the beach. We go to the beach sometimes, but we rarely go to the beach. I try to get my runners back into more inland areas, and we run in deserted areas where there's not many residential streets and not much traffic. So we try to get away from the heat. we're running away literally. But the beach is nice because you got lots of washrooms and stuff along, and that's why runners love the beach, because every 500 meters or 1 kilometer you've got a washroom that you can use. Hydration and fueling practices. We never start a run without a cooler. So that little guy on the left there, it's always a staple thing, a cooler filled to the brim with ice cubes and cold water. People love water and you just drink and drink. Watermelon is also favored here. After every run, we break out a watermelon, really refreshing. I don't know if you guys out there do this, but try it. Really refreshing fruit. Usually we have volunteers bringing the water, bringing the ice, bringing the watermelons. Here's another drink that I don't know whether you've seen this. It's called Pocari Sweat. It's engineered in Japan, but it's very popular here in the U.A.E. And Pocari Sweat has made a little market out of it. So the science is that you're literally drinking your sweat. I mean, it's engineered with all these minerals and and things to kind of mimic the sweat that you lose. So does it work? Absolutely. It's not too sweet, you know, like some carbohydrate drinks that you get in the market, which is just very, very sweet. But the Pocari Sweat is just right, and it just is much better than water because due to all these reasons, it's got all these the magnesium and the potassium and certainly the sodium. So this is not cheap, okay? And so we prefer water most runs. But when the stress of the run is high, we know that it's a long run. We need something extra. We bring a cooler filled with Pocari Sweat bottles. We also use coconut water and dates sometimes. Coconut water is nice because it's got potassium. Anyone studied the potassium content of coconut? 400 milligrams. So if you're having problems like cramping and stuff, try coconut water because it's got potassium. Whereas something like this, Pocari Sweat, doesn't have much potassium, but this is more of a natural drink here, much cheaper. You can find in the grocery store, and it really goes well too. Dates are nice, juicy fruit. Very, I mean, it's no brainer. This area is very popular with date palm, so you get dates for cheap. And dates again have got potassium. They've got lots of other minerals, sodium. Look at the carbohydrate content. So this is something jam-packed with everything you need, especially carbohydrates. So 100 grams of this thing will give you 75 grams of carbs. If you can muster that much amount of fiber, which I don't recommend, because there's 8 grams of fiber in 100 grams of dates. I don't recommend this as a sports food, but every now and then it doesn't hurt to carry a few dates with you. And I've seen runners doing that because they like natural stuff. And this is a nice chewy date has also got some, there's water content in it. So Pocari Sweat isn't cheap. It's 1.4 US dollars per 500 ml bottle. So water is cheaper, so we prefer water. But this is just a summary of what I just told you. Watermelons, dates, coconut water, Pocari Sweat, ice. We use ice to put it in our caps and put the cap back on and continue running. So we never come to a long run without our coolers. One of the last things I want to talk about, and certainly something that I keep playing around with, is the fabric, what we wear. So in my club, we got different colors for our fabrics. We got yellow, we got mint, we got white. And we keep playing around with the colors to see if wearing a different color enhances the comfort a little bit. So on the left side, you see some of my runners lined up for a race, and they're wearing what they call race yellow. And then one of the runners is wearing a mint blue color. I've toyed, that's me in the middle. I've toyed with a custom design which exposes more of my backside from where they just to enhance the surface area from where water can evaporate. And again, me on the right side with my Spanish and Kenyan compatriots, using white singlet. The idea being that white colors help reflect the light more, but it certainly doesn't prevent the fabric from sticking to your skin. So you can see this fabric it's really sticking. Yeah, to enhance comfort, you need some air gap between the fabric and the skin to be able to radiate that. One of the problems with white is while white reflects heat from the outside, when your body radiates heat to the white fabric within, the white reflects the heat back into the body. So this is why some people say black clothing is better in this regard, because black just radiates everything. So I haven't played around with black. I'm just a little nervous wearing all black. But having said that, there are runners who wear all black for our runs. There's some Muslims among our group who just Muslim ladies especially, who just like their hands and feet covered and they go all black. And I'm really curious how they survive, but they seem to do fine. Black color has also been something that the Bedouins used to use. The Bedouins, the the natives of the region used to wander from place to place, and camels, they used to use white robes and black robes, which used to be baggy, really baggy, and with an air gap between the skin and the fabric to allow the air to flow through. And that's something that's been used, especially among the local ladies. You can see a lot of local ladies wearing black. Something puzzling, in this heat, you would think they would wear more light colors, but black has been something you see a lot in this region. There's also a lot of engineered clothing. I have this in my wardrobe. I use them sparingly, but I've just taken a cutout of the advertisement for some of these things. They're engineered in Switzerland, and they have all these fancy stuff like air channels and um, extra vents, and it's really interesting to see. But I mean, the litmus test, the acid test, is if you wear them and if they don't feel comfortable in when you run, that's it, right? It doesn't work. But there's all this extra fancy stuff you can buy in the market today, which I'm still playing around with, but I haven't found a great deal of um, difference, and I still continue to play around with it to see if it really works compared to a very simple traditional t-shirt or a singlet. So that's a compression type shorts, again, engineered with all kinds of stuff. So they say it has an intercooler with 3D construction, blah blah blah, air conditioning zone, ISO pad. I mean, these are all like fancy terms, but like I said, you got to use this to see if it works or not. I certainly like having a little bit of compression. I don't know about you, but when I run in the heat, a bit of compression helps because just it tends. I mean, in my experience, it tends to delay the onset of cramps, and also you just feel more compact wearing a bit of wearing compression tights. So I don't know. It's I guess it's something that people have got to try. I do want to talk about socks now. When you have sweat and heat, what's the first thing that comes to mind? Blisters. So if you're wearing traditional socks, especially where we're training, we use a lot of Vaseline between the toes, and really we smother that on the toes before we wear our socks. But now you've got these kind of socks which are called toe socks, and toe socks made by certain companies. This one is called Injinji. If you want to check it out, it's really great. In the heat, this thing really works. I tell you, it really works. You save your feet and you can keep running without having to go through all the ugly effects of blisters and so on. So socks, I can tell you, really makes an effect. If you wear the wrong socks and the wrong shoes, I told you, running on the blacktop with all that heat coming at you, and you again, every step is inducing friction. And if you're wearing the wrong socks, which doesn't give heat out, you're just gonna feel really, really, really bad in the feet. So socks plays a big role, and I've seen a good effect to that. Cap and ice towels. Cap certainly we use a lot, but there are some runners who don't prefer to wear the hat, because when you're really struggling to find a surface area to get the evaporation going, if you put a hat on, you're simply blocking that extra headspace where you can get the heat out from. So some runners prefer just to get rid of the cap. Whereas me, if I get radiant sunlight, I prefer to wear a cap. But again, it's a very personal thing for me. There are some caps that I just don't like to wear because they're just too thick, it's too heavy, and I feel like it blocks the heat flow. So I experiment with a lot of caps. I have a big cap game going on here, more than 20 caps in my shelf. And I'm always like playing around with things. So this is something I do all the time in the heat. If something doesn't work, I'm trying something else. So that's shoes, socks, caps, you name it. I've got everything. Ice towels. I don't know if you've. I mean, this is a new technology. I mean, in the past, people have found out that if you dip a towel and then wring it dry and put it on your neck, it tends to induce a cooling effect. But there's these things in the market you can get that I haven't found a great deal of comfort or cooling. But it might differ for you. But try this out. This one is made by Ice Mate in I think it's a South Korean company. And this towel has perforations on it. And the idea is you put it into water and then you wring it dry and then you wrap it around your neck and then suddenly you feel cool. So I don't run with this, but it's something that we have to try and experiment with. One of my most important slides is this. I want to emphasize the health testing. So I make all my runners do health testings, especially if they're coming under my training. It's for the simple fact that I want to know if they have a thyroid issue. As I said, thyroid affects pretty much everything. It regulates the body temperature, it regulates the heart rate. So there are sometimes some runners having hypothyroidism, high TSH values, which needs medication to stabilize. Sometimes it doesn't need medication. So then there's blood count. So people with low blood count or some kind of hemoglobin deficiency that prevents them from absorbing the training load and adapting in the right way. You want to find that out quickly. And runners are very open with me about sharing their data, and I keep it really private between them and the runner, and myself and the runner. I just want to know who am I training and what baggage are they bringing to the table? Because if I'm blind to that, and if I'm giving two sets of people the same training, one person is going to crumble and the other person is going to adapt well. And it's most likely because there's something wrong with one of them in the body that maybe they don't even know about. Like I had this one runner who had it's a condition called thalassemia or thalassemia. So it's something to do with hemoglobin. Is not your body is genetically predisposed to low hemoglobin, and I gave two runners the same training, and one runner just broke down. And later on, he tells me he had this condition, and I was like, "Wow, you tell me now that you had this condition. You didn't tell me before." The other runner was fine. He was just asking for more. Hey, where's the next training session? And he was going fine. So this is what I'm trying to tell you is you gotta. I mean, you gotta. I mean, it's just not about signing a waiver. A lot of times people sign a waiver just to get on with life and get that training program from you, but they might not they might not be being honest. So these are some of the things I do as a default practice here for runners. If anyone comes for my training, I say, hold on, let's do a blood test. Let's do an annual health checkup. If you haven't done one, let me see the report, and then we'll go about the training as per that. If you've got a clean bill of health, great. We'll go on with training. If you've got some issues to correct, then I might tweak your training program, especially if you're training with me in the heat. All right. Okay, so this is something to think about. Do genders see a difference in perception of effort when they run in the heat? I've certainly seen some effect on women versus men, especially when it comes to older women. Older women tend to cut out, cut the duration of their run quicker. They stop running quicker than the men. The men are able to carry on. I've always wondered why this is the case. I mean, I've read that women generally have higher body fat, and I told you before that body fat, it's a natural blanket for our bodies. So women have higher body fat due to certain reasons, and due to that, I've seen that some of the female runners don't really react well in the hot climates. Also, the older women, because of the hormonal issues with the menopausal menopause, there's all this idea of the hot flashes, sudden brief sensations of intense warmth. I mean, I don't discuss these things with them, but it's nice to be aware of this as a coach, because if you're training, people who are about 45 years of age, and some of them are women, you might want to think about genders and how the heat could affect males versus females. So this is something that we can discuss in this forum. Especially, I'm very keen to hear your thoughts on this topic, because this is very interesting. Okay, I'm sorry to take extra time, but I hope that really stimulated your thinking. Now I open the floor to any questions, and Colin told me there's going to be debates and questions today, so bring it on.
If you Ron, clear this. Go full screen. Go non-full screen.
Okay,
Yeah,
sure.
and something amazing will happen.
What's that?
Well, no, you just click on stop share screen.
Oh, stop share screen. If I can find that stop share. Is it pause share? No, it's not pause share.
Yeah, pause share it. No, yeah, you'll find it. I'm
Is
sure.
it pause share? Is it pause share?
Yes, try it. View options.
Okay.
No, I need everybody back full screen. Go view options. Oh, okay. Well, I'm going to put everybody on the screen anyway.
Stop. No.
Yeah,
It's
stop share
before.
screen. It is stop share screen.
Where is that stop share
It'll be either
screen?
the top or the bottom of your screen.
Okay, let's.
Hang on. I've got view options.
Yeah, that I don't see that option at all. Where's that? Interesting.
Anyway, right, Ron, that was absolutely fascinating. I wanted us all to be on screen because we're going to give you a Zoom round of applause. Everybody was fascinated with that. So if you make sure you press the square at the top with all the little squares in, you'll see us giving you a round of applause.
I see you. I see you.
Yeah. So as a geographer of many, many years, I've been in heaven for the last 75 minutes because it's been a mixture of humidities, dew points, and running together. So I'd like to thank you very much for that. It was absolutely fascinating. Before we go on, I admire the marketing man that thought of selling people a drink called Sweat to people, but
it's a Japanese guy. And,
yeah. It's got to be an optimist. Okay, so I've got lots of questions, but I'm sure if whilst people are asking you questions, if you could go try to find the stop share screen if you can multitask, that would be good. So Bill's put a question in the
there you go.
Oh, you got it. Thank you.
A wee little button hidden.
Yeah, that's good. So Bill, because you went to the U.A.E, didn't you, to play cricket amongst other things, and you were comparing the heat in the U.A.E to the UK.
I've been several times, yeah.
Yeah, but what was
your on a stopover to places like Sri Lanka.
Oh, okay, yeah. And so, what were your observations?
Well, it was always in the winter, as Ron said.
Right.
So, like November till March, and because it's so arid. And I did run as well when I was there, and I was younger then anyway, but not much younger in some cases. Because it's so arid, it doesn't actually feel as discomforting as going for a run on a hot June humid day here, in a funny sort of way. So it's a bit deceiving in the sense that you don't really realise you're getting overheated until it's quite significant. So that, but it's a lot easier to run there than say here if it's 30 degrees here, you really know about it because it's so humid. And the same, but equally on some of those trips, we were on our way to Sri Lanka or India, and running there on the coast, particularly somewhere like Colombo, is you really notice that, and you really notice the cricket as well because you're at 35 degrees but it's humid.
Right. Yeah. So that humidity,
that might have been 5 or 6 degrees less than it was when we left Dubai.
Yeah,
it's a completely different experience in terms
of what we say.
Tiredness and all the rest of it. Yeah.
What do you think on your visits to other countries, Ron? How do you compare? Because how applicable is the Dubai heat compared to other places when it's really hot?
Well, it's like that example I showed you. The same runner doing a run here in Dubai, and then within a week span of time, he goes to Italy, and he's able to run a minute per kilometer faster for his and for longer duration. That's what I see when I come to the UK. I love the temperature. It's like, wow, a godsend. And I'm able to run. But hang on, here's the thing though. Because now you want to run faster because the temperature is higher, there is more muscular load. And I feel that this is why heat can be a blessing in disguise, because you got to run slower, right, in the heat. So that's a lesser muscular load. And I feel there's an injury proofing mechanism here that many people don't think about. Whereas when it's all cool and nice, you want to run quickly, and you put a lot more load in your body. You can. However, that doesn't take away from the heat stress we talked about. You can run at a submaximal pace for a long duration in the heat and really cook yourself. And you might need sometimes 3-4 days to recover out of it. That's why I tend to limit my long runs, because I tell runners, look, we got to get back on a Tuesday and continue to train during the week. If you make this long run so long that you take 3, 4, 5 days to recover, we're not going to get the mileage. So that's, and I would agree with Bill. There's all kinds of factors playing into the weather. So the climate, it's not only air temperature, but also humidity, wind. Oh, so between March and April, there's these wind patterns called the shamal, which is a northwesterly winds. It's very prominent here in U.A.E. And when those winds hit, while it's maybe cool, you feel like, wow, let me go out for a run. It's really sandy and dusty. That wind brings a lot of particulates with it, and it's not really fun to run in. Whereas in your place, you don't have so much like particulates in the air, although you can have wind and rain along with that. But here, the dust is another factor.
Right.
This is the issue why when you train in these areas, sometimes you just can't follow all the training guidance written in these books, which are mostly written by Western authors for a Western audience. So it's so hard to get 100-mile training week in the U.A.E. I mean, you don't see runners doing that. 100-mile training week. 100 kilometers a week would be great if, and that's on a rare occasion. But you would do that. You would tend to see runners doing that who would mix up some of the outdoor runs with indoor runs on the treadmill or something. But training all the time on the asphalt in this kind of temperature is not easy. I mean, for me, for example, I'm doing about 50 kilometers a week, and I think I'm in a good place. If I kept increasing that, not only would I have to increase my calorie count to sustain this big mileage, but I also need to be thinking about the after effects of each hot run, the headaches, the nausea, unless you're training in the heat, you wouldn't know what I'm talking about. You could be doing a tempo run in the UK and a tempo run here in U.A.E. at somewhat the same pace, and you'll be getting out of this run in the U.A.E. with a headache. And that headache might last for a couple of hours. It just makes you tired. The heat is definitely a cause for fatigue.
Let's open it up, because I'm sure we've got lots of questions. Anybody got any comments on what you do in the heat? Steph, how warm is it in New York at the moment?
It's, we just finished a heat wave where it was like 90 something for about 15, 16 days. But right now it's like 88, but 100% humidity and like 70% dew point. So, but the heat started in New York probably 6 weeks earlier than it usually does.
Right. Yeah.
Right now.
And so is your experience the same as Ron's then, about what you do with your runners in that sort of heat?
Yeah. It also, like, for people are super clear in New York, and I'd be curious to hear what it's like in the rest of the world, like if heat is their kryptonite or humidity is their kryptonite. Because we definitely have periods where it's lower temperature but much higher humidity in New York. Right? It's rare that we have like a 95-degree day with 100% humidity. it's very rare that we see that. We're either seeing super high humidity or yeah. So I'm kind of curious to hear that, but the humidity is probably, I would say, my current client load, I would say 75% of them would rather run in 90 degrees with no humidity than
Yes,
than high humidity.
That's the reason why I stay away from the beaches, which I touched upon that in one of my slides. I do not like to take runners at the beach because on a hot day in June, we find the humidity is so high that the running track, you can see a nice fine layer of wet. It's wet because the humidity is just it's just falling onto the track, and you can just with the light of the street lamp, you can see a kind of a halo around the light bulb, and you know that there's got to be something in this air today, because you can see it, you can feel it. It's that's why we go inland. We try to get these remote areas we can train on. And if it requires a headlamp and it doesn't matter, but we're much more comfortable that way, and oftentimes we can run farther, get our mileage goals that way.
Thanks. Now, Mark, I think you come from Newfoundland.
Yep.
Yeah.
So
Notice how I struggle to pronounce Newfoundland. But
it just rolls through fast, and it's just
so just because the geography teacher can't help but ask you that question. What's the temperature today in Newfoundland?
Today is a cooler day. It's about 20 degrees Celsius. So I'm trying to do a Fahrenheit conversion.
Yeah. And what was your question?
I was just going to say, like, similar to Steph, here it is really the humidity is the issue. I've had my own bad experiences with humidity. I've had heat stroke twice, like medically classified loss of consciousness, heat stroke. So the most severe incident was 6 days in a coma. And it was on a 10-mile race. So I collapsed at 15 kilometers, or just after 9 miles into a 10-mile race. Or I can't say collapse. I had no control I had no mental faculties, but I sat down in front of a fire station underneath a water hose and was completely non-responsive, with a heart rate of around 185 when they measured it. And I was brought by ambulance to a nearby hospital, 6 days in a medically induced coma, multi-organ failure, very close to kidney liver failure. So I woke up very jaundiced and very couple blood clots. And I spent another 3 weeks in the hospital with severe rhabdomyolysis because of the organ and tissue damage from it. So I was, just 3 weeks on basically 4 liters of potassium fluid or potassium IV a day. So I lost about 30 pounds of mass, and I came out of that incident having to relearn to walk again, basically, or build the strength to walk. So I had a less minor incident at the same race 4 years later, but it was 2 days in a hospital, 2 days in a coma, and 3 days in a hospital. But it for me, I think, speaking back to genetically, I guess, predisposed things, I believe I have I generate higher CK levels after physical and after strenuous activity. And I've been trying to work with my doctor to get more timely medical testing. But I just raced the same 10-mile race last week. I did it at a lesser pace. I overachieved versus, it was warm on that day out of nowhere again, 25 Celsius. I did very well in the race, especially compared to some of my contemporaries that I race against in 5Ks. I finished ahead of most of them. But even with the relaxed effort where I went through smiling, the recovery week is definitely, it's a very long recovery period. Instead of just being about 10 days, I definitely lean towards, 2 weeks to 2.5 weeks, just for the muscle soreness to settle back.
Yeah, that's a salutary lesson, Mark, for us all, isn't it? The fact that it's really quite dangerous if you're predisposed to that heat. I do find that there are certain runners who cope better in the heat and certain runners that don't. I've always outperformed a lot of people in the heat. I put it down to the fact that my skin is very white, and I reflect most of the heat coming into me off on the other runners, so it doesn't affect me as much. I don't know, but I would wear, I've done long distance runs in Spain in 31, 32 degrees and wore a white cop and
So
any of the things you said, Ron.
can I ask Mark, how do you ensure that you're not going to get into trouble again?
Well,
what measures do you take?
that's a tricky situation. I mean, on training runs, I easily just slow it down. Races now, I just have to rely on my own self-control to pick a goal and not. I mean, my wife's very tolerant. She allows me the last couple of years to race the same 10-mile race that I've been cursed with, that we keep getting cursed with random high heat. And I mean, last year we were coming off 10-degree days, and out of nowhere, this race day was 25 again. Like, we had 2 days, Saturday and Sunday, where it was 25 and then dropped down to 12 degrees. But I just basically promised I wouldn't do a race pace. I mean, she doesn't know what that means anyway. I ran my half marathon pace, which really wasn't much different. But I mean, I run, especially that course, with a bit of nervousness, because I mean, I know the first time it happened, I mean, I knew right from the get-go, I was a relatively new runner. I'd done this race. I'd taken 10 minutes off from my first year to my second year. So I thought, how hard could be to take 2 minutes off in my third year? And right from the get-go, like, my heart rate was 180. I could see on the watch. They had just repaved the road. So speaking of hot pavement, I mean, you had the fresh blacktop there. It was radiating the heat on this day. It was hitting you from both angles, and it was just a rough day. I mean, I did not necessarily. I think if I knew now what I knew then, I'd know, okay, I should slow down, and this should be, scale back to conditions. This isn't good. Back then, I thought, well, my heart rate's at 180. I might as well just, if I finish faster, it's just going to let me rest and bring it down. So I just kind of pushed on through. In 2018, 4 years later, it was a different circumstance where it was a super humid day, and I really felt great, and I thought everything was going well. I'd scaled back a bit right from the get-go from race pace. I thought I made the adjustments, and I was taking the very last turn. So 16.1K. At 16K, I took the last turn, and I felt like I was on a sheet of ice. And I went down to a knee, tried to get back up, stumbled again, went down to a knee again. Next thing, and the medics were on me, and I was in an ambulance. So I'd like to think I know the difference and I can make the adjustment, but I mean, that heat, I don't know, when you have that heat exhaustion, a heat stroke, and crossing the heat stroke, it just comes on so fast. I had a runner last year whose the last words I said to him were, "Hold on to me, you'll be all right," at the start line, and he got released from the hospital 3 days later. So, and he just said, he thought he was fine, and then he wasn't, and then he woke up.
So, if that's the circumstance, maybe there's some measures that you could take in your training to prepare you for the occasion of having a hot day.
Well, this year we did have some warmer weather in the 10 days prior to the race. So I made sure to get out every day in the heat, but just with super slow run, just to get the soak in that acclimation whenever you can. In the past years, we just haven't gotten a chance to. But this year we actually had about 7 to 8 days before we had some warmer days. So I said, I don't know what race day is going to be like. I'm going to get out now. If it's cooler, best kind, no issues. But if it is warm, I will still get out and become more accustomed to the heat and just get used to it. And I mean, I made sure I'll drink my water. Pre-hydrating is a thing that we often talk about here on especially 24 to 48 hours before I up my electrolyte consumption, not to the point where it's sickening, but I made sure I was taking in those fluids, and I avoided all alcohol, probably from about the midweek point, anything that would be dehydrating.
So, it really brings home the point of developing a feeling base so that we're getting information in real time that we can interpret and know how to adjust our effort. It's just that athletes have this ability to just sort of push on.
Yeah, and I'm a stubborn runner, if anything. I was never athletic, but I was always determined and stubborn.
Yeah.
So I was not feeling good. I should have read those cues, and I just pushed through.
Yeah. Ron, would you have any recommendations for cool weather runners who are training and going into preparing for a race that is potentially going to be hot on the day?
Yeah, the challenge there is because you're mostly faced with cool weather, and when that hot weather comes in, you're not prepared because you're not acclimatized, because you don't have that hot weather to go and prepare yourself in. So I don't know, Mark, have you considered maybe using a sauna or some artificial methods like that. Also, you talked about hydration, which is very important before a race, even before a long run. What we do here is starting T-2 days, we start on the hydration, because we know, especially when it's a heavy day, I tell my runners, guys, get on the hydration. Make sure you're getting your liquids, because it's going to be hot. But yeah, I would advise you to keep, if you get that chance to expose your body to heat, whether that's artificial or actually outside, 40 to 45 days, and about maybe 10 to 14 days, you want that exposure before you start putting too much load. Get the exposure first, let the sweat glands, etc., just get adapted, and you want to make sure that you're breaking a sweat and your hands are wet, your skin is wet, because if it's dry, you're in trouble, especially when it's hot. That's a litmus test here when we get out, and we're so adapted that we start dripping sweat, and most of the sweat is, it's not even, it's like water. It's almost like water. When you become adapted as a good sweater, like, you don't lose a lot of uh, sodium. It's mostly just water. Your body, in fact, retains the sweat, the retains this the sodium. It learns to do that, and that's an adaptation mechanism. But exposure to heat, there's no other way, I guess. It's just, you got to get yourself exposed. And when it's not hot enough outside to get that exposure, I think you got to look at other methods, means. You touched upon your health report, and something I picked up was a CK value, did you say?
CK, so creatine kinase, which
Creatine kinase, okay.
it would be high in your blood level, like, say, it's what doctor
Yeah.
would do at hospital detect if you just had a heart attack, because it's released with tissue
Yeah,
damage. So the same thing as if you have muscle damage from strength,
muscle damage,
it would be elevated.
yeah.
So
Yeah.
it should be 20 to about 200 maybe for a regular person, depending on what they've been doing. And my levels were 32,000 a week after. So it was,
Wow.
people I know who are in the medical profession now, they were like, we've seen people who have been, severe heart attacks who have never crossed those levels. Like, they were surprised. Whenever I break out the medical reports I have out there, it's always, people are always intrigued. But that's what kept me in the hospital, because just the
other thing I can think of here, Mark, is treadmill running with air conditioning turned off. So deliberately, training in a hot room. While it sounds, terrible, that might be one thing you could look into. You're trying to create an environment which at least gets you 90% close to what you might feel on race day outside. Wearing clothes, maybe overdressing a little bit to get that internal temperature higher, that's something else. So that you could do both indoors and outdoors, just to get your body to sweat. That's the idea here. So you might try that overdressing, and then if it gets uncomfortable, get it off. But once you finish that
sweat is not an issue.
period,
The running joke is the amount of sweat I produce. So even in the dead of winter, I am soaked through with sweat. So I am a very heavy sweater, thankfully.
Yeah.
Or thankfully, like.
Yeah, but indoor training, like whether that's on a bicycle, like, a lot of people ride bikes inside, and they can tell you when they race inside, they're dripping with sweat. But that's, your body adapts to it. You can create all kinds of conditions that kind of mimic what you will be faced outdoors, just by manipulating what you have inside. Maybe turn off the fan, turn off the air conditioning, wear extra clothes, and the intervention, doesn't have to be long. It could be 30 minutes, 35 minutes, 40 minutes.
Yeah, it's
So
like
just
any
get
training,
creative.
isn't it, Ron? You just have to, wherever you're at, you just have to do it incrementally, and your body will adapt to it. So I did the heat training for the various Olympics, and that it was just a matter of layering up. So, and training in the heat of the day. But when you do your workouts, you want to do them, you know, where you're most comfortable and you're going to be running well. So it would be on my easy days. I just put extra layers of clothes on and go out in the middle part of the day and not get too hot, but it just increases your comfort level with and your perceptions of what hot is as you adapt. So so when I got to the actual race, especially Barcelona, because Barcelona was so hot, and they had the women's race start late in the afternoon. I think 4 or 5 o'clock we started the race, so the temperature of the road was like extremely hot. You know, if you put your bare feet on it, you would have burnt your feet. And so you know, that takes a lot of people out, which is really wonderful in the Olympics, because if you're prepared for it and, you know, most of your field is down the tubes because it's too hot, well, then you've got a huge advantage. And the temperature when we started was 96 degrees Fahrenheit, which is about 36 degrees Celsius. So, you know, incredibly hot start. But we were running into the evening, so it got cooler as we went. But, you know, that initial temperature rise determines how your glycogen is going to be utilized throughout the whole thing. So I think having done the heat training and I didn't even have a perception of it being hot when I ran that race. It didn't occur to me. But it sure took a lot of people out. So, so, you know, can be done. And, you know, I'm just a little white girl from a very temperate climate. And, you know, we need to take these factors into consideration. And I've seen it happen many times where athletes' dreams are dashed because of the weather on the day. And it's a factor that seems to be completely out of their control. However, you know, if we did just dress up a couple of days a week on, say, an easy run and just wear some extra layers, then we can probably have what we have as an amplitude of response is increased, and then we can cope with the temperature much better. So, Ron, tell me when you do your long runs once every 2 weeks with your runners, are they training in a periodized block or?
Yeah, very much, very much.
So you do mile repeats, but is that like an aerobic type mile repeat session?
Very much.
Yeah.
So when I think of mile repeat day, I know I want my runners to run about 10 kilometers or a little more. So I make them do an easy run, and when the run starts, an easy run. Then we get into the mile repeat segment. We start off with 4 mile repeats. So as they start training, about 4, you know, is good enough. 4 mile repeats with about 2 minutes recovery in between. And then after that, some more easy running, very easy jogging, in fact. And when you combine everything, at the end of the day, you have about 10 to 12K. So for me, that's a great thing to insert right between 2 long runs, where long run could be 90 minutes and above. And with the mile repeats, as I said before, it helps them run at pace. They're running at marathon pace. They're running at a little faster than what their current marathon pace is, the marathon fitness is, just a little faster. And you know, you would say 2/3 effort, certainly not 3/4 effort. You don't go that intense. Maybe towards the last interval you get there, but you're very much in a controlled state throughout. It's not high intensity by any means.
So it's your equivalent. Sorry, Lorraine. It's your equivalent of an out and back, isn't it?
Yeah, sorry, is that to me?
Yes.
Yeah, out and back. Yeah, correct. Out and back is yeah, you don't race an out and back. You're not trying to race here. You're trying to train within your fitness, and that's why I classify each run into what their marathon potential is based on some metric, whether that's a 5K, a race fitness, 5K race fitness. Everyone's classified into, and I find sometimes the runners cluster up into, like 5 or 6 runners would be in a similar cluster. When we do mile repeats, I encourage them to run in clusters to be able to use each one's energy and sort of mimic what they would face on a marathon day when there's runners all around and you gotta stick with the flow. But if they are very widespread apart in terms of abilities, no, they don't try to chase one another. They try to remain in their comfort zones and train their muscles and for where they are, for where they need to be.
I bet with your runners, they actually by necessity have to tune into their own feelings, and because the downside is too great. But as a coach, you really have to pay close attention to them until they get to that point. Yeah.
Yeah, some runners are not calibrated well. When they start doing these mile repeats, they're thinking only in terms of the mile. Oh, let me see how fast I can run. And it requires some effort from me to tell them to slow down. Wait a minute, this is not trying to be fast at the mile repeat. It's about trying to run at your marathon pace in a long interval fashion because it's hot. We want to run at pace, but we want to control the duration and be able to take a little break after that and then repeat it again. But initially, when runners do this, they are not calibrated, but eventually they get into their zone. And it requires a bit of effort from my side to help them see that they're running too fast. But the conditioned runners, the experienced runners know where they need to be. Like, the perfect example is the 8-minute miler who is currently at 8-minute mile and he's hoping for a sub 3:20 finish or a sub 3:15 finish. He knows that he just has to run a little faster than where he is now and get the cadence and the neuromuscular patterns and try to study that in about 7 to 8 minute block. Take a bit of break and then do it again. And he's never flustered when he's doing that. If he's flustered, he's running too fast, or he's just, maybe his body's not responding well on that particular day, which happens. You might be feeling great on a Saturday, but you didn't get enough sleep. You forgot to hydrate. Come Sunday, humidity is high, temperature is high. You try to run 8-minute mile, heart rate's through the roof. So that's why the talk test is so great. At marathon pace, you're doing a talk test. I find, it's my personal experience, I'm able to 101, 102, 103, I can get up to 108, no problem. And that's 8 threes are 24 words. I can get 24 words out of myself without having to take that breath. But if I'm running at a 10K pace, things are different. I might get maybe 10 words in, 12 words in. And 5K pace, definitely, much smaller than that. So I teach runners the talk test, and also we do stuff like the naked run. We did that like early part of the year where I told runners, take the watches out. You'll only start the watch, but you'll then drop it somewhere in your backpack or put it in your pocket. And I told them to run and just run based on perception. And a lot of them really loved that run because they were able to just very naturally be able to use their brains and the internal perception to control where they need to be. And then when they took out the watch and stopped the watch, they were very pleasantly surprised that they were very comfortable throughout the run. Whereas when you have a watch, psychologically it affects you. Oh, the pace is slow, let me speed up a little bit. Or it can also work reverse. You see the heart rate rising. There's a 3-digit number. It keeps going up and up and up. Oh my God, I need to slow down. But that heart rate could be wrong. Like a lot of runners, and I keep telling this, please bring a chest strap, because I am not someone who is fond of these wrist-based heart rate monitors where a lot of them don't wear their watches snug tight, and because they're running fast. Sometimes, it picks up erroneous readings. So we make it a practice to use chest straps, which takes the reading right directly from the chest. But what I'm trying to say is, when you look at these numbers, they psychologically affect you one way or the other. You either speed up or you slow down. Whereas it's so much more nice when you can develop an internal feeling based, And then I think that's one thing Mark might need, is to get more calibration to your internal sense of where you need to be when it gets hot. That comes with more exposure to heat and interventions. You can get creative with it and just try to maybe put the watch aside and just mentally think about where you need to be when the conditions get tough.
That's
Ron,
fabulous.
sorry, Lorraine.
No, I was just going to say how wonderful it is to have these build into your coaching, these ways that the runners can get to know their own bodies better and make it fun. And I'm sure they love coming to your sessions, Ron.
I hope so.
When we did our level 3 chat and this, the heat came up, you talked about how you fueled the long runs, which is against what we would say on our level 2, purely because when they're on the long run, they need to fuel, and how you train differently to get the fat metabolism to work. Could you just go over that for us?
Yeah. If it's a challenging run, I tell runners to practice eating and drinking on the go, because as Lorraine touched upon, the heat affects the substrate metabolism. The body wants to tap into the easily accessible sugars. So if you're running a 2-hour or 2.5-hour run, by the time it comes to 1 hour and 45 minutes, you're already 70%. The body is tapping in. So this is the reason I advise people to practice eating and drinking. It's not necessarily to take away from that fat metabolism idea. We have runs which during the other parts of the week, we do easy runs where you go out and run for 45 minutes and you don't take anything. You can even do that in a fasted state. But when it comes to heat training and doing the long run, it's a different issue. Would you want to not take anything and just die and continue to see that pace drop? Would you want to sustain your run by preserving your liver glycogen and being able to get the training effect? Because to me, it's no fun just being empty stomach and having a really bad day and then ending up in walking. We're not there to walk, we're there to run. So we need something to keep us fueled. And I don't see any other way out of this, especially for the long run and the heat. We do need to fuel. Whether that takes away from this idea of training the fat system, I don't know. It's an open question. It's something for debate or discussion, I think.
Yeah, and
does that take away? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we find that runners have different levels of need. Like some are naturally more fat burning type people and others.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
And so we do need to tailor it to the individual, but we also need to tailor it to every personal circumstances. So you have a particular environment, and having, if somebody needs it, to do a shorter run, but do it in a fasted state, is one way of just hacking that system. So I agree with you. Yes, we want to make sure that our runs are set up so people have a positive experience and they don't get too far into that whether they have a lot of discomfort.
I heard one coach say that you eat to keep the brain fueled, so that when you're in the heat for 2.5 hours, your brain doesn't shut off. You're actually feeding the brain to keep going. And sometimes even caffeine helps, a little bit of caffeine. If you overdo the caffeine in the hot weather, I've seen it could cause all kinds of GI symptoms. So we don't overdo the caffeine. We are also careful about caffeine the pre-run caffeine intake. If you take too much caffeine very close to the run, you sometimes don't feel good. So we're always playing with these kind of things. But I keep thinking about the feeding the brain issue, especially and I think he talked about that because he was from an ultra running background where you're running for 6, 7, 8 hours and you can't run on empty in that kind of state. They worry a lot about eating and drinking. When it comes to the heat, it's also kind of like that, where after 2 hours, you're like, why am I doing this? I'm feeling terrible. And sometimes you're fuzzy about things, But I find eating and drinking, it just keeps you back into the zone. It's kind of like the music, people like to listen to music so they don't zone out. Yeah, sometimes food has this effect. It keeps people happy and make them want to continue to run.
I know that your group's going to Spain in December, Valencia.
That's right. That's right.
And I'm just wondering, if Steph, you've had like 2 or 3 weeks of very hot weather. Does when you have when it turns cold again, is it like coming down off altitude and everybody's suddenly turbocharged, or does it? Is Ron's group going to go to Spain in December and charge around this marathon, or might it not happen?
That is the hope. That is the dream. Although, as I said, because of the heat, especially in the summer, you're still not able to get a lot of volume training at marathon speeds because it is stressful. Yeah. So even now we're doing a lot of easy runs and a little bit of marathon pace work in a block training style. But my hope is as September, October rolls in, and I'm looking forward to those months, we're going to slowly start shifting towards a speed training where we do 400-meter repeats, we do 800s, where we can run at speed. And yeah, definitely, we hope to take stronger bodies to Valencia and be ready for whatever. But I've heard the temperature there is ideal, like it's 12 degrees or something, and it could even rain. So that's another worry now, because now you're training in the heat and you're adapted to a different set of circumstances than what the race might throw at you. And I'm not personally, I don't like rain. I don't like running in wet weather. So that's
so another... don't go to Manchester, Ron. Yeah, crack on. Yeah.
Look, I'd always find, training in the summer, and it can be a real drag after a few weeks, and you go, oh, my training's not going that well, etc. And then suddenly you get a cool day and you're really flying. It feels fantastic. Yeah. So, that's what you hope for. So you get adapted to these difficult circumstances, but what you've gained in those is you get a nice ideal climate race, and you can really fly, and that's wonderful. So
what I'm hoping for is we can extend these mile repeats. So right now we're doing about 4 to 5, but as the marathon comes close, and while the heat is still there, I want to try and get up to a dream goal of 8 to 9 mile repeats, while we do our easy runs also on the back of that. So in all, it'll be a fantastic run if we can get our bodies in shape to do that many mile repeats and be able to run at marathon pace.
Yeah.
That's what we're hoping for.
It's always a trick to push the envelope and not push it too far, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah. So does anybody have any last questions or comments before we finish up here?
No? Ron, I do one more thing. Hi,
sure.
Steph in
Hi.
New York. Hi, Ron. So you
Hi.
made a comment about middle-aged women and hot flashes. And I'm going to encourage you to add this book to your shelf. It's called Next Level. And it's going to explain to you how estradiol, which is a component of estrogen, impacts the core body temperature of women in menopause. So even if you don't want to talk about it, you need to know about it if you're coaching women who are older. So it's just something that impacts, because it's not always about the hot flashes. It's the fact that the declining estradiol, which is a component of estrogen, there's receptors all over the body, and when there's less estrogen, you don't know when it's hot or when it's cold. So you can't produce the appropriate response. So it's not just like, oh, they're having a hot flash and they're dogging it. Their brain literally doesn't have the hormone that's driving the metabolic response anymore.
Yeah.
And you'll go a long way with your older females, Ron, if you're like, hey, I've read about this, because they'll be like, whoa, this dude cares. So it'll feel, so even if you don't want to talk about it, you can have that as a resource for them.
Yeah.
So they can educate themselves.
So
that's my only offering.
Very good,
because it was a great
Thanks,
presentation, but as like an older lady in menopause and nobody wants to talk to me about it, I'm like, dude, talk about it. I want to be seen. Like, I want to run as hard as you do, you know?
You know, once you gain the trust of certain women, and that's, again, as a coach, when it takes some time to know a person, and then when that barrier breaks, there are females start, the communication barrier is no longer there.
Absolutely.
I have certain female clients we're very open about that, because if I know that the cycles are there, the training, you can't run the same.
That's right.
Especially when when it comes to long duration runs, their bodies are just not able to. And you also get the signals when there are absences and you don't see them in the run. You know that something's up, and that's
totally.
I'm
you were
totally
like,
fine with that.
You're on it as a coach, and you can tell that your presentation was amazing. I loved it, but I was like, I want to give him this book because the old ladies want to talk about it too, Ron. We do.
Thank you.
Perhaps that's a topic for next time, Steph.
Yes.
Yeah,
I think,
coaches catch up for next time.
Fantastic one. Yes. Yeah. Steph, we got you pegged.
It's real sad that a lot of the literature around running is written by men, and even the running research is conducted on men. And it's only now that it's
If Lorraine and Colin, if I can get my friend Christine to come, who wrote the book Up to Speed, would you guys want her on? If I could get her to come to a coach's catch up?
Yeah,
absolutely.
Okay. I'll see if I can make that happen.
Yeah, and there's lots of people that would be really interested in it as well.
Yeah, for sure.
A great topic.
It's changing, which is great. Love it.
Yeah.
It's changing, which makes us realize what a warrior Lorraine was. And that she did all this without knowing any of this.
Yeah. At the level that I ran at, the hardest thing is like getting to where you want to go without killing yourself in the process. So fortunately I didn't. So. Okay, but I had a good training program and good people watching over me. So thank you very much, Ron. It was a fantastic presentation.
My pleasure.
It will be the recording will be available to the other coaches. So would you like to just say how people can get a hold of you, Ron?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm available on Instagram. You can send me a message. But if you're old school and you like to write an email, my email address is ron.r.george. So R is my middle initial. So ron.r.george, which is spelled GEORGE @gmail.com. I really like emails. People sometimes like to write to me, and I'm still a bit old school. I like emails, so no problems. But if you're in Dubai and you want to give me a call, no problem. You can do that too.
There you go. You can go for a heat run. Okay, go for heat training in Dubai. Okay, thank you, everybody. We look forward to seeing you again in a few weeks. And we'll be, please just keep checking the website. And just lovely to see you all. Thank you very much.
Yeah, great questions. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, Ron.
Thank you.